Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show. So let's start with Andrew Cuomo, the Love Gov, the state of New York. From ABC News, Governor Cuomo says he's not accepting liability for economic losses from COVID. The federal government is liable, he said. They're going to pay the bill, not us. How is New York City, New York State going to solve the deficit? We're not. It's Donald Trump's deficit. Perhaps the Love Gov should have thought of this before he decided to wreck New York's economy. But for people like him, it's always someone else's fault. But it gets worse. Omri Sarin, who works for Senator Ted Cruz, tweets, "We use Orwellian too often, but one, in March, Cuomo issued orders sending COVID patients to nursing homes. Two, by May, 4,500 people sent to nursing homes because of order per Associated Press, catastrophically. So New York reversed, and three, scrubbed it from sites. Today, Cuomo said it never happened." Let's see, Cuomo tells Finger Lakes Daily News that COVID patients were never sent to nursing homes. It never happened. My old colleague, Kelly Jane Torrance, has something to say about this. This is outrageous and not true. Nursing home operators asked if they could send COVID-positive nursing home patients to the Javits Center. The Cuomo administration said no. Here's a story from the New York Post. April 24th, New York health officials were warned in writing that a Brooklyn nursing home where 55 patients have died of coronavirus was overwhelmed weeks before it began topping the state's official list of resident COVID-19 deaths, damning emails show. Cobble Hill Health Center CEO Donnie Tuckman sent a desperate email to state health department officials April 9th, asking if there was a way for us to send our suspected COVID patients to the hospital built inside the Javits Convention Center or the U.S. Naval hospital ship Comfort, the underutilized federal medical facilities on Manhattan's west side. "We don't have the ability to cohort right now based on staffing, and we really want to protect our other patients," Tuckman wrote in a chain of emails reviewed by the Post. He was denied. "I was told those facilities were only for hospitals to send their overflow patients," Tuckman said. At that time, only 134 of the 1,000 beds at the Javits Center were full, and the Comfort, which had just been reconfigured to treat up to 500 COVID-19 patients, had a mere 62 on board. Adding insult to injury, the Navy hospital ship wounding up treating just 179 patients before Governor Cuomo on Tuesday said it was no longer needed. The Comfort remained docked at Pier 90 with 29 patients on board, but was expected to return to its home port in Norfolk, Virginia as soon as possible. Cobble Hill has led all state nursing homes in the number of residents killed by the coronavirus since the state health department began releasing those figures last week. And Kelly Jane Torrance's tweet was in response to one from her boss at the New York Post, Sohrab Ahmani. "Siri, what's gaslighting?" So how many people actually died in New York State nursing homes because of Cuomo's order? Well, I guess we're never going to know about this. Cuomo doesn't want to release the figures, but he has been messing around with the figures. What happened in New York State nursing homes was that people, elderly people, got COVID, and they were at death's door while dying. And so they were moved to hospitals, and Cuomo determined that these would not be counted as nursing home deaths. They would be counted as hospital deaths. But if you want to get even more of the flavor of this man's effrontery, his chutzpah, here's a story from Spectrum Local News in Albany. Governor Andrew Cuomo accused critics of New York's handling of nursing home deaths during the COVID-19 pandemic of politicizing the deaths of people's loved ones on Wednesday, calling it both mean and unfair to do so. This is a man who has politicized COVID-19 right from the very beginning. Here's what he had to say. Having someone who lost a loved one saying to them, well, this was a government mess up. This was unnecessary. Your father could be alive. Your mother could be alive. Your grandmother could be alive. That's just untrue. And frankly, it's mean. Seriously, people, I am not making this up. He added, ignorance doesn't help grieving people. New York's nursing home policies have come under scrutiny during the coronavirus pandemic, including a since partially rescinded order that required nursing homes to take in COVID-19 positive patients. The state has instead pointed to asymptomatic staff and guests earlier in this year unknowingly spreading the virus. At least 6,300 residents of nursing homes have died during the pandemic, but because the state does not include residents who died of COVID-19 in hospitals, the death toll in those facilities is likely much higher. The Empire Center, a conservative-leaning think tank, has filed a lawsuit to access public records that could show nursing home fatalities in full. The report that blamed asymptomatic carriers of the virus, too, has faced scrutiny from both Democratic and Republican lawmakers who've asked for the raw data of how the report was compiled. Early in the pandemic, state officials sought to rapidly expand hospital capacity, fearing the system would become overwhelmed with cases. But ultimately, the state did not transfer COVID-19 positive patients to nursing homes, Cuomo said in the call on Wednesday. It just never happened that we needed a nursing home to take a COVID positive person. How about that? Well, here's a story from the Daily Mail back May 27th of this year. New York Health Department website quietly deletes controversial Cuomo order that forced nursing homes to admit coronavirus patients and led to 5,000 deaths. The March 25th order said no resident shall be denied readmission or admission to the NH solely based on a confirmed or suspected diagnosis of COVID-19. Earlier that month, in that same month, he defended himself by saying he and many other governors enforced the same rule as guided by the CDC. The nursing homes said, we are not equipped to handle this. It's going to end badly. And Cuomo just bowled ahead. The webpage where the March 25th order was originally located now shows the message, we're sorry, the page you are looking for is not found. The page was deleted after May the 5th, according to Fox News. This should be the biggest scandal in America, but it's not. And why isn't it? Because it's fake news. The news media is fake news. We all know this, but they have gone truly above and beyond this year. Andrew Cuomo's effrontery is such that he's actually written a book about the leadership lessons. Yes, the leadership lessons that he is teaching Americans because of COVID-19. I guess those leadership lessons would be make a disastrous decision to infect thousands of people, leading to thousands of deaths when alternatives were available, and then remove the evidence and then lie about it afterwards, all while maintaining that this is Donald Trump's fault. The Post editorialized yesterday, well, David Marcus did at any rate, it's past time to pull the plug on Andrew Cuomo's dictatorial pandemic powers. I don't mean to alarm the good people of New York, but it's important that they understand that we are living under a dictatorship with no end in sight. Who's the autocrat in question? Why, Andrew Cuomo, of course. Perhaps because his father was governor before him, Cuomo may have grown up thinking of himself as crown prince and now fancies himself a king with unquestioned authority. But the ultimate blame falls squarely on a state legislature that has now abdicated its duties for the better part of 6 months. Like father, like son. I suppose younger viewers will have heard that Andrew Cuomo's father, Mario Cuomo, was some sort of paragon of American politics, the best president America never had, you know, that line. Well, Mario Cuomo was a creep. This was brought home to me when he was running for president in the 1980s. I came across a laudatory story, a feature about him, Mario Cuomo, just to let us know just how clever a man he is. When he was in high school, a Catholic high school, he was caught walking the halls holding a cigarette. And the priest said to him, Mr. Cuomo, you know that cigarette smoking is not allowed on school grounds. And Cuomo said, but Father, the cigarette isn't lit. Jesuitical, I suppose you could call that. You see, this story was included, as I say. We're supposed to think better of Mario Cuomo as a result of that. Certainly didn't have that effect on me. Daniel Abel says, Governor nipple rings. Yes, indeed, although he has denied that too. Heck McNeck says, if the MSN says it never happened, then it never happened. It won't be recorded in a single history textbook. Good evening to you, William Hicks. So, super spreaders. I guess they're kind of like the 2020 equivalent of super predators. And I think we're going to be hearing an awful lot about these alleged super spreaders in the near future. This is a story from the Los Angeles Times yesterday. Largest study of COVID-19 transmission highlights essential role of super spreaders. In the bleak ranking of worst COVID-19 outbreaks, the United States with 7.2 million infections is likely to be eclipsed only by India, which has 1 million fewer cases, but is catching up fast. Of course, this assumes, that that the rest of the countries in the world are actually compiling this information, and I don't know, like China, say, are actually releasing the true figures. China never releases true figures about anything, but never mind that. Yet parts of India have led the world in one aspect of the pandemic response: contact tracing, the labor-intensive, time-sensitive, painstaking work of identifying people who are exposed to a known infected person. It's never exactly been explained to me how this is supposed to work. Although recently, when I was at a restaurant, a White Spot, with one of my brothers, I was asked for my phone number. And what do you need my phone number? Oh, contact tracing. Oh, okay. So if someone else in another part of the restaurant tested positive for COVID-19, they would call me up, because it's never made any sense. Extensive contact tracing in 2 southern Indian states offers the strongest evidence yet that a few super spreading individuals, soon to be called wreckers or domestic terrorists, I suppose, are responsible for a disproportionate share of new coronavirus infections, according to a study published Wednesday in the journal Science. It also suggests that children are more efficient transmitters of the virus than widely believed. Yes, this goes against everything that we've been told previously, but that's the wonderful thing about COVID-19 science. It could just be rewritten pretty much continuously. A team of Indian and U.S. researchers examined data from 575,000 individuals who were tested after coming into contact with 84,965 people with confirmed cases of COVID-19. How exactly can you prove that they came into contact with these people? That's an average of 7 contacts per case, and a cohort more than 10 times larger than in a previous study from South Korea that mapped how the virus was transmitted. Oh, so we have this one study that says one thing, and we have this other study that says something much more alarming. So obviously, this one study that says something much more alarming must be true. The lead scientist and his colleagues found that just 8% of people with COVID-19 accounted for 60% of the new infections observed among the contacts. Meanwhile, 7 out of 10 COVID-19 patients were not linked to any cases. The finding underscores the essential role of super spreaders in the COVID-19 pandemic. One individual or event, such as in a poorly ventilated indoor space, can trigger a high number of new infections, while others might not transmit the virus at all. In the new study, researchers tracked down 78 people who had shared a bus or train with one of 8 known infected people and sat within 3 rows of that person for more than 6 hours. Health workers visited these contacts at their home to conduct follow-up screenings and determined that nearly 80% of them had contracted the coronavirus. Of course, this is in direct opposition to studies from Germany and Britain, which show that there is a very little likelihood of people passing on COVID-19, even on lengthy train journeys. But we need more panic. And Science Magazine and the Los Angeles Times has helpfully provided that to us. Here's another panic story from Greg Ritchie of Bloomberg Quint. The City of London's traffic light streets look set to outlast the pandemic. Rules introduced over the summer to maintain social distancing in the financial district have seen wider footpaths, driving lanes narrowed, and in some cases timed road closures. But as officials eye an enduring shift away from motor vehicles, I see a hidden agenda here. Many of the changes could stay even if the pandemic ceases to be a major issue in the near future. Alistair Moss, chair of the City of London Corporation's Planning and Transportation Committee, said, "We've got the luxury at the moment that we can try things out and use the pandemic as a virtue." Use the pandemic as a virtue. The pandemic has just been an absolute godsend to the planners, to the latrine Wallace, that it's a blessing for them. It's a nightmare for everyone else. But so long as the experts are happy, that's all that matters, right? He continued, a lot of these roads were congested. Air quality has been an issue. Road safety has been an issue. We're determined those things should be tackled. So I'd anticipate that a lot of our measures will stay. The restrictions targeted roads with high footfall and narrow sidewalks to encourage the return of workers and make extra space for both pedestrians and cyclists. Yes, cyclists good, drivers bad. Changes have been made to some of the city's most iconic thoroughfares, including Cheapside, Threadneedle Street, and Cannon Street. Despite the measures, the district remains far quieter than before a national lockdown was imposed in March. Moss said the restrictions, which would need to go through consultation procedures before becoming permanent, would increase the city's long-term competitiveness. Yes, the economy has been deliberately crashed, but it's now leaner and meaner. Let's go to lockdown skeptics from Will Jones today. The Prime Minister tried to put on, that would be Boris Johnson, or the man who calls himself Boris Johnson. His name is really Al, and that's what all his friends and family call him. The Prime Minister tried to put on his best Churchill impression yesterday and ended up sounding preposterous as he dug in to fight and defeat the virus. Yep, it's a question of, showing the virus who's boss. I know some people think we should give up and let the virus take its course, despite the huge loss of life that may entail. He said, "I profoundly disagree. I don't think the British people want to throw in the sponge. They want to fight and defeat this virus." He's gone mad. He's absolutely gone mad. Fight and defeat this virus. Take that, virus. We're on to you. Your tricks don't work with us anymore. Be gone, virus. Johnson said that he will not hesitate to introduce further measures, but stressed the government is hopeful that these will not be needed. Huge loss of life. Comments Will Jones. Right, like in Sweden, where fewer people died per million than in the UK, and Belarus, where fewer people died, and South Dakota, where fewer people died, and Tanzania, where you get the idea. Since none of these countries or states, however lax their response, lost more than 0.06% of the population of the virus, and the second ripple in Spain was on the wane prior to any new restrictions being brought in. Hospital occupancy in Madrid fell yesterday for the third day in a row. On what basis are we supposed to believe that loosening restrictions would lead to a huge loss of life? Where did the ludicrous idea come from that we can control or defeat this virus, which is akin to the common cold? Meanwhile, Sir Patrick Vallance claimed that the virus is not under control and defended his graph of doom. The illustration was to point out that epidemics either double or halve. They're either growing or shrinking. And doubling means things go very big very quickly. And when things double, you see the exponential growth. Oh, that's back. And there's clearly fast growth in some areas. So unfortunately, as we've seen, not only cases going up, but we're always seeing an increase in deaths. So things are headed in the wrong direction. The number of cases that we're seeing now are picked up because there's much more testing. The number of cases reported in March were almost an underestimate of the total. So it's much more likely in March and April that we were seeing 100,000 cases a day at certain times. Yes, when in doubt, just make things up. Jones comments, but it simply isn't the case that the COVID-19 epidemic has either been doubling or halving over the past 9 months. That is a misrepresentation of the data that feeds into the government narrative that it is either growing exponentially or out of control, or it is in decline, supposedly because of timely government interventions. In fact, the case and death curves in different countries show only very brief periods where the figures could be said to be doubling, as Professor Michael Levitt has shown. Thus, while UK cases are currently rising, the rate of that rise has already slowed down from a couple of weeks ago, and the Telegraph has calculated that there will only be 11,000 daily cases by mid-October, assuming the current rate continues, rather than Valence and Whitty's 50,000. Since the rate has already been slowing, there is no reason to think that it won't slow further. Note also the slippery definition of cases. Valence suddenly used case to mean infection when he says there were 100,000 a day in March. In fact, one of the central problems in this whole farrago has been a loose, non-medical definition of case. A case properly understood must be diagnosed by a suitably qualified clinician recognizing characteristic symptoms. A mere positive test, which may well be a false positive and in any case may be asymptomatic, is not properly speaking a case of COVID-19. Neither is the mere fact of infection or exposure if no symptoms are present. To make matters worse, Dr. Chris Whitty then started speaking in contradictions. Hospitalizations follow very much the pattern you would expect from the rates of infection. The NHS data show that the rates of hospitalization are now climbing steadily. They're at a much lower level than at the beginning of April. I want to stress that quickly, but they're heading upward at a steady and rapid pace. So are they steady or are they rapid? You can't have both. They're steady, of course, which is why he said it first before realizing he was supposed to be justifying extreme interventions, so quickly added rapid. The positive rate in the UK went up from 1.5% on September 19th to 2.5% on September 29th, a two-thirds rise in 10 days, although on the most recent day it actually declined slightly. This is steady but not rapid growth, and if it is anything like Spain, it will top out before long. Could it be the second wave is just the usual round of Fresher's flu, watched unusually closely, now with added COVID? Perhaps Churchill has picked the wrong enemy this time. Yeah, it seems to me that Boris Johnson asserted that there was a crisis, a deadly crisis, and he's going to stick with that, regardless of the facts. And such data as exists will be manipulated endlessly to justify the destruction of civil liberties in the United Kingdom, the destruction of the economy, and the elimination, as much as possible, of social life. Let's see, Dr. Chris Whitty yesterday stated that hospitals are open for business and are ready to help people with all conditions, not just COVID. A reader begs to differ. Last week, I had a telephone consultation in a Hertfordshire surgery re the possible onset of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. The doctor said that, yes, that sounds like COPD, book an appointment for a spirometry test. This is an essential element in diagnosing COPD. As this incurable condition progressively worsens, more spirometry tests are conducted and changes in treatment are made. I booked the test and was called back 15 minutes later to be told that my appointment could not be kept because it was not allowed. Not allowed? I asked. What do you mean? It's not allowed. I understand that. I said, why not? Again, the reply, it's not allowed. And so it went. Eventually, in a temper, I requested he ring back shortly when he had found out exactly why this essential test for COPD was not allowed. 15 minutes later, he rang back. It's not allowed, he told me, because the test involves exhaling with as much force as one can muster, and therefore there is a COVID risk to the nurse. If there is that much risk, have the test outside. This test, I repeat, is essential for COPD diagnosis and treatment. As absurd as this is, the doctor herself, by proposing that I have a spirometry test, is clearly unaware that currently in that practice, at least, they are not allowed. A new Ipsos poll for the BBC seems to catch the great British public telling pollsters what they want to hear. Quote, overall, a large majority of Britons say they are very likely or certain that they will follow government guidelines and self-isolate should they test positive, come in close contact with someone who is positive, or arrive in Britain from a non-exempt country. 84% will do so if they themselves test positive for coronavirus, while 77% will do the same should they come into close contact with someone who tests positive. Further, 71% say they would quarantine if they return from a country without a travel corridor. Oh yes, 84%. So why did King's College London find only 18% of those who developed symptoms followed the self-isolation rules, and that just 11% of contacts of those who tested positive did the same? Well, yes, the phenomenon of people lying to pollsters or telling pollsters what they want to hear is well established, but it seems obvious to me that we'll be getting a lot more of it this year, because if you don't do as you are told, you are likely to be accused of being a murderer, quite seriously. Let's see, there was a sad piece in the Globe and Mail by a young woman called Joanna Chu, and she was talking about responsible people like her who are following the rules, and now they're getting seriously depressed as a result, because following the rules doesn't mean that the virus can be, licked, defeated. We can knock that virus out. That's not how it works. She wrote, social bubbles are bursting, COVID-19 is still spreading, and winter is on the way. Are you mentally prepared for what's next? Mark briefly considered putting off ending a relationship that wasn't working out. So daunting was the prospect of a winter alone in his Toronto apartment with only the company of his roommates, 2 cats. Yes, 2 cats. Very lonely, I guess. So what we're going to have, the gist of this story is that people are going to be forced to stay together, or compelled or pressured to stay together, because the alternative is too frightful. I couldn't waste your time, but I'm concerned about dating and life in general during the pandemic, and winter isn't going to make things better, the 32-year-old said. Toronto's accelerating COVID-19 spread has killed the concept of social bubbles of up to 10 people, prompting city officials to urge residents to now get close only to other household members. The new advice was announced Monday, along with proposed new controls on bars and restaurants in response to a sustained surge, including 381 new confirmed and probable infections in a single day, and a record 700 for the entire province. The worldwide death toll for the coronavirus also eclipsed 1 million on Tuesday, 9 months into a crisis that has forced multitudes to change the way they live, learn, and work. You notice they throw out these huge numbers like 1 million in the world. Well, Ontario isn't the world, is it? It's a province of over 14 million people. In Canada, for many Canadians who've been living alone or with roommates they aren't close with, socializing and exercising outdoors have been key to maintaining mental health. But as the days get colder, such coping mechanisms will be less acceptable. Steve Jordan's a professor of psychology at the University of Toronto, says several compounding factors can do a number on mental well-being. Quote, people have been working to stop the spread, and cases coming back can make us feel helpless and disempowered. With the lack of sunlight and less social connections from not being able to spend as much time outdoors, that's a triple whammy, unquote. Mark requested to use only his first name to talk openly about his mental health struggles, in addition to being less than enthused about going on virtual dates. With people through dating apps, he is worried about his career. I'm one of those people who struggle with work from home. I'm having constant conversations with my manager because of decreased productivity, he said, adding that this is distressing because he wants to stay on top of his responsibility. Young people are reporting higher levels of stress and anxiety compared to those over age 60, despite their significantly lower risk of dying from the virus itself. This is almost criminal here, that we have terrified young people when they do not have a statistically valid chance of dying from this or even getting seriously ill. The research shows that 96% of people under age 25 said they've experienced moderate or high levels of stress as a result of the pandemic, compared to 68% of people over the age of 60. In Kelowna, BC, dentist Kimberly Epp says she's been seeing more patients coming in with temporal mandibular, TMJ, disorders in recent week, which are often related to jaw clenching from chronic stress. I'm dreading winter this year. I'm ready for all this to be behind us, said Epp, who has strictly limited her personal social interactions in order to protect her colleagues and patients. In BC, the current guideline is to maintain a small and consistent social bubble and to keep a 2-meter physical distance from all other. But through the spring and summer, the ease of seeing friends and relatives at a distance outdoors has delayed for some time the awkward question, who should you allow into your bubble? Now children are back in school and many adults are back to workplaces where physical distancing is a challenge. Dr. Anna Banerjee, infectious disease specialist at the University of Toronto, says having bubbles of 10 is not really a bubble unless all of those people are exclusive to the group. If you go out with a group of 10 people and then even one hangs out with another group, it's an open circuit which allows the virus to spread. Lockdowns don't work. It's that simple. Let's see, what does Alex Berenson have to say? The old normal. Schools were open, faces were uncovered, interstate travel and religious ceremonies were unrestricted, colleges weren't prisons. Adults were treated and treated each other as human beings with autonomy, not disease vectors. I prefer the old normal. Yes, Facebook has been overzealous with so-called fact-checking, says Krista Nicole. Now Twitter tells me to read an article before retweeting. Go away, Jack. Berenson comments, and Twitter's bias is becoming more and more obvious. I'll have more to say about that and Jack Dorsey's problem with crypto. It's not what you might think. Not what you might think. Let's look at that. Hang on. Let's look at that right now if we can, because this is really, it's funny. It's irritating. You know, it's infuriating, but also funny. You know, it can be more than one thing. Jack Dorsey, Dick Costolo, this is from Business Insider, slam Coinbase CEOs no activism policy, setting off debate among tech figures. And I'll have more to say about Dick Costolo in a minute. Twitter CEO Dorsey and former CEO and investor Dick Costolo are among the tech figures publicly criticizing Coinbase CEO Brian Armstrong. Armstrong has forbidden corporate and employee activism at his company, he said. He has told employees who dislike this to leave the company with severance, according to leaked emails. Dorsey argued that Coinbase's mission revolves around Bitcoin, which is itself direct activism against a status quo financial system that negatively affects so much of our society. But Costolo's comments set off a real firestorm when he used language involving a firing squad. Some believe that Armstrong's move to push politics out of his workplace were necessary during a polarized time, while others characterized it as tone deaf and punitive. Bitcoin, aka crypto, is direct activism against an unverifiable and exclusionary financial system which negatively affects so much of our society, Dorsey tweeted. Important to at least acknowledge and connect the related societal issues your customers face daily. That leaves people behind. Coinbase helps people buy and sell Bitcoin as well as other popular cryptocurrencies. Dorsey frequently praises Bitcoin. Earlier this month at a forum in Oslo, he even said he expects the currency to shape Twitter's future. Yeah. It was scathing comments from investor and ex-Twitter CEO Costello that caused the biggest backlash. After investor Paul Graham tweeted that Armstrong was leading the way, Costello replied that Armstrong's stance was the abdication of leadership, the equivalent of telling your employees to shut up and drivel. Costello then tweeted, abandoning the social contract with employees, the social contract with employees. That's a good one. In favor of a purely economic contract in the guise of championship team BS, makes you a bank with a mission nobody really believes. How about the bank? The mission of the bank is to keep your currency safe and available. That seems to me to be a pretty good mission. Abandoning the social contract with employees in favor of purely economic contract in the guise of a championship team BS makes you a bank with a mission nobody really believes. Good luck getting the best engineers in the world to work at a bank. And then, me first capitalists who think you can separate society from business are going to be the first people lined up against the wall and shot in the revolution. I'll happily provide video commentary. And it was that violence-laced sentiment that set off a backlash. Let's see here. Is it still up on Twitter? Because other people, including Michelle Malkin, have pointed out that they have been suspended or banned from Twitter for much less violent statements than that. Specifically, yeah, it's still up there on Twitter, specifically calling on Donald Trump to enforce the law vis-a-vis rioters and looters. Makers need time, and Brian is protecting that eligible CEO. Caitlin Gleason replied, he's protecting the art of creating and building over the violence, hatred, and outrage your later tweet exudes. The art of creating? Brooklyn Bridge Ventures founder Charlie O'Donnell replied to Gleason, he's not Picasso. He's building an online brokerage for Bitcoin. Forbes' Adam Brown even went so far as to characterize Costello's opinion as some business leaders should face a firing squad. What makes Dick Costello think that he's not going to be first to the wall in any revolution? Do you think in this revolution they're going to be extra sweet to billionaires, to tech billionaires? Because, you know, a lot of these Antifa types, they detest Twitter because they're not Twitter's not censoring enough I mean, Donald Trump is still on Twitter. I mean, can you imagine that? The President of the United States still on Twitter? Outrageous. What's going on in the chat here? Okay. Donald Robertson says, was Cuomo applying Heidegger there? YT, is the chat working? It didn't seem to be working before, but it seems to be working now. YT says, KMG, I recently spent 38 hours on a train, New York City to Denver, then multiple bus rides and airplane flights. Didn't get COVID. William Hicks says, seems like children and the young are totally being screwed over. The Moby Dick virus, says Donald Robertson, Prime Minister Ahab. Again, you can't defeat a virus, you can only survive it. NorCal on the right says everything they're doing suppresses our immune system. Yo Mama says COVID has killed less than 1 in 1,500 Americans, and for that we turned life upside down. Hello to you, Professor Paul. What people like Andrew Cuomo are loath to say, I'm sorry, I don't want to say, oh, don't you care about old people? Look in the mirror, love gov. You're the one who's responsible for the death of thousands of them. I don't want to sound cruel about this. As mentioned before, I'll just mention it briefly, that my father died, well, with COVID. I don't know whether he died of COVID. But the average length of longevity after being admitted to a long-term care facility is 5 months. I think the problem here was that since everyone was needlessly terrified of this, many of these people, including my father, died alone. They were not allowed visitors because the nursing homes screwed up, and then they panicked, And that's it's a terrible way to die. YT says, chat is definitely not working for me. Too few messages. Well, there's a lot more than last time I checked. William Hicks says, that's some serious doublespeak. Bitcoin is a value transfer protocol system. The developers solved the double spending problem. It's way better than the Fed. Totally predictable system. Matt Beck says, have Jack Dorsey and Peter Dinklage ever been seen in the same room together? Yes, there is a very strong resemblance. William Hicks again, Bitcoin is a viable alternative to systematically deprecated fiat currency. Okay, so let's get back to it here. White supremacy. Oh, it's all the rage, white supremacy. It has never been satisfactorily what white supremacy is. Does it mean the white man's burden? Does it mean that white men should be like the 19th century, the scramble for Africa? That every country in the world should be run or dominated by white people? No one is saying that. Well, you can posit any ridiculous, preposterous, genocidal statement or whatever, and a few people will back it, but there is no support for a return to colonialism. Are people saying that non-whites should be stripped of their civil rights? No, that's not happening either. Instead, we have a war on white people. It is a two-front war. There's the war of words, and there is the war of deeds. And we all have to admit our racism, white people. We can't be, you're either racist or anti-racist, says Ibram X. Kendi. Black Lives Matter, and don't moderate this in any way, because that would be wicked. That would make you a racist. That would make you a white supremacist. It's all nonsense. It's all absolute nonsense. This is from Breitbart. Fox News' John Roberts loses temper at critics of his white supremacist questions. I have known John Roberts since the 1980s. He's Canadian. He was a VJ on Much Music, which is Canada's equivalent of MTV. He was a funny guy. He's obviously a clever fellow. I enjoyed his parodies that he did. But now he is a senior White House correspondent and rather more pompous. Joel Pollack reports Fox News' John Roberts lost his composure during a report on Fox News Thursday morning, attacking those on Twitter who criticized him for the way he asked White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany about the president's stance on white supremacy. This is from Oliver Darcy, who is part of the fake news crowd at CNN. I don't understand why he wouldn't say, I denounce white supremacy. I've always denounced white supremacy. For some reason, they aren't saying the word, and that's what's very puzzling. Yeah, that's what you want to do. You want to play inside your enemy's frame, your lying, disloyal, treasonous enemy's frame. Again, from Oliver Darcy on Fox News, John Roberts is visibly angry that press secretary won't offer a clear denunciation of white supremacy. Stop deflecting. Stop blaming the media. I'm tired of it. Well, we'll stop blaming the media when you stop lying, when you stop claiming that Donald Trump praised the alt-righters or neo-Nazis or KKK, whatever they were at Charlottesville, when he did no such thing. He was talking about people who were gathered there to protest the destruction, the toppling of Confederate monuments. He said there's, good people on both sides. This was not a defense of Richard Spencer and his ilk. Trump has denounced white supremacy, whatever that might mean, again and again and again. And he was asked during the debate this week, would he denounce white supremacy? And he said something like, sure, I'll do that. For all of you on Twitter who are hammering me for answering that, Robert says, for asking that question, I don't care, because it's a question that needs to be asked. It has been asked and answered many, many, many times. In the White House press briefing moments before, Roberts asked McEnany 3 times whether the president denounced white supremacy and appeared not to accept yes for an answer. Roberts first asked for a definitive and declarative statement without ambiguity or deflection as the person who speaks for the president. Does the president denounce white supremacism and groups that espouse it in all their forms? In all of their forms. Apparently, believing that the United States should not be swamped by third worlders is considered white supremacy now. McEnany replied by noting the president had answered that question a day before and on the debate stage. She also read a list of quotes in which the president denounced white supremacy, including one in which the president said, "In one voice, our nation must condemn racism, bigotry, and white supremacy." She noted that Trump has condemned white supremacy more than any president in history. Now, I know that on Twitter, this is another outrageous lie from Donald Trump. Well, obviously, he is the president who has most condemned white supremacism, because this was not a phrase which was much used until he became president. Certainly not by correspondents on Fox News. And again, I'll just point out that white supremacy means apparently whatever you want it to mean. There is no commonly accepted definition of it. And the whole idea of the United States being under the grip of white supremacy, white supremacism, is absurd. It's a damnable lie. Roberts said, "You read a bunch of quotes from the past. I'm just asking you to put this to rest." McEnany said, "I just did." She attempted to move on to the next question, but Roberts interjected, "Can you, right now, denounce white supremacy and the groups that espouse it?" McEnany replied, "I just did." The president denounced white supremacy, the KKK, and hate groups in all forms. He signed a resolution to that effect. The president just last week, perhaps you all weren't covering it, just last week expressed his desire to see the KKK prosecuted as domestic terrorists. The president advocated for the death penalty for a white supremacist, the first federal execution in 17 years. His record on this is unmistakable, and it's shameful that the media refuses to cover it. In his report later, Roberts attempted to justify his question, citing concerns from the president's Republican colleagues, some of whom incorrectly said on Wednesday that Trump should have denounced white supremacy during the first presidential debate. As Breitbart noted, Trump did so. Update. McEnany noted on Twitter that Roberts' own wife, Kyra Phillips of ABC News, had reported the day before that Trump had denounced white supremacists in direct answer to her question on the White House lawn. It's a funny kind of white supremacy that exists in the United States when white people are forced to justify their very existence, because that is what it has come down to. And as Omar, Ilhan Omar, I resent anyone who says Trump is not racist. We have fascist in the White House. This follows Trump scuzzing her in her own state of Minnesota. In a video clip from last night's Minnesota rally, Trump said, "What is going on with Omar? I've been reading the reports for 2 years about how corrupt and crooked she is. Then she tells us how to run our country. Can you believe it? How the hell did Minnesota elect her? What is wrong with you people?" You remember in 2016 when Trump said to Republicans, "I will teach you how to win"? Well, QED. Omar said, "I mean, this man is a white supremacist, so no surprise that he has ideas of feeling that Somalis are worthless and having a hard time accepting the fact that, a district that is 65% white can elect a Somali refugee. But the truth is 78% of them voted for me to come to Congress, and not only are Minnesotans welcoming of refugees, they've sent one to Washington to represent them. We are very clear that in Minnesota, we are greater than hate. That is why he didn't win in Minnesota in 2016 and why he won't this year. We shall see." She continued, "It's completely terrifying, truly, to have the president not only condemn white supremacy, but to tell him to stand back and stand by." Oh, you're going to go down that route, are you? Yes, the Proud Boys, that group that no one had heard of until earlier this week, is now the greatest threat to American security. You really want to go with that one? And again, no story of this kind would be complete without hearing from the celebrities. Elizabeth Banks. So I'm going to vote for the guy who didn't tell white supremacists to stand by, who didn't attack a man's son for dealing with addiction. Oh no, attacking a man's son for dealing with addiction, that's not what he was attacked for. We're talking about crackhead, incestuous Hunter Biden, and who believes in climate science. Chelsea Handler. So now all Republicans in Congress and Republican voters who continue to stand by Trump's side and are standing with white supremacy, they're devaluing this in the same way that racism has been devalued. Anyone who disagrees with me is a white supremacist. That's not going to end up well. Veep star Julia Louis-Dreyfus falsely claimed that Trump just said to all white supremacists to stand back and stand by. The president was only addressing the Proud Boys, which isn't a white supremacist group. As I pointed out yesterday, they are a DR3 group. Ava DuVernay, that outstanding director. For those who hadn't been listening for the past 4 years, Trump just told you that he ain't leaving and that he is a white supremacist. If that doesn't get every American who is not white into overdrive to toss his ass, we may actually deserve what happens next. Oh no, I wouldn't want anything bad to happen to you, Ava. You're just so very talented. Mia Farrow said Trump could not condemn white supremacists. Comedian Billy Eichner, a physiognomy is real, people, who was one of the most disgusting looking people I've ever seen, said the fact that Trump said Proud Boys should stand by is one of the most disgusting, dangerous things that could have possibly been said. What a vile, racist bitch. Vote this MFer out. And there's more along those lines. When he said stand by, come on, he obviously meant, stand away, etc. But step off, as the kids say. Oh, here's an interesting story from white supremacist America. This is from the Sacramento Bee. Governor Gavin Newsom signed a law on Wednesday. It opens the door to the state paying reparations of some kind to Black Californians, especially those who are descendants of slaves. And how could this be proved exactly? The law does not commit to any specific kind of payment. It calls for a 9-member task force that will be asked to make recommendations for how reparations could be provided, such as through compensation or restitution. The task force can also make recommendations on eliminating state laws and policies that perpetuate discrimination and on issuing a formal apology, quote, for the perpetration of gross human rights violations and crimes against humanity on African slaves and their descendants. Yeah. So, we got the Cotton South, slavery, pretty much central to their economy. And of course, California, slaves were essential to the gold rush. Again, from Joel Pollack at Breitbart. As the state's California's Department of Parks and Recreation notes on its website, in 1849, Californians sought statehood, and after heated debate in the U.S. Congress arriving out of the slavery issue, California entered the Union as a free, non-slavery state by the Compromise of 1850. Despite California's free history, the Reparations Task Force is assigned the mission of evaluating the history and impact of slavery on the United States as a whole. The goal, as with so many California policies, is to be a model for liberal policies elsewhere, or as Newsom said, according to The Hill, to be a paradigm that we hope will be resonant all across the United States. There appears to be at least one problem, however. The criteria for selection to the 9-member task force appears to be racial, and California's constitution currently bans discrimination on the basis of race. That may change if voters approve Proposition 16 in November. And Proposition 16 would repeal Proposition 209 of 1996, and it would bring back state affirmative action in California. Okay, yes, so here are some more dispatches from white supremacist America. Once again, from Breitbart, a professor at Ohio State opted to take anti-racist learning after writing an article talking about his love of college football. Ohio State University professor Matthew Mayhew wrote an article for Inside Higher Ed touting the virtues of college football and saying that bringing back college football could help diminish the great isolation, division, and uncertainty we are experiencing in this dismal year. Mayhew, a higher education professor at OSU, insisted that America's universities should get back to essentializing college football. He said that college football reminds many Americans of the community values that underscore higher education and, by extension, America itself. Yet with this simple premise that football should be brought back full force to make us all feel better, Mayhew was accused of racism and, wait for it, white supremacy. And he penned a groveling apology. I have learned that I place the onus of responsibility for democratic healing on Black communities whose very lives are in danger every single day, and that this notion of democratic healing is especially problematic since the Black community can't benefit from ideals they can't access. I have learned that words like distraction and cheer erase the present painful moments within the nation, and especially the Black community. I'm sorry for the hurt, sadness, frustration, fatigue, wait for it, exhaustion, and pain this article has caused anyone, but specifically Black students in the higher education community and beyond. I'm struggling to find the words to communicate the deep ache for the damage I have done. I'm designing a plan for change, for turning the I am sorry to I will change, for moving Black Lives Matter from a motto to a pathway from ignorance and toward authentic advocacy. I felt sorry for this fellow, and then I read his groveling apology letter. Screw you, pal. You're not worth defending. Get up off your knees. Here's a story from Jason King at Outkick. The impact of the Black Lives Matter movement on football can perhaps best be told through the story of Kurt Beathard, not Colin Kaepernick. Beathard is the son of Pro Football Hall of Famer Bobby Beathard, the legendary Washington Redskins general manager. Until a few weeks ago, 57-year-old Kurt Beathard was a small college football coach, the offensive coordinator at Illinois State. He patterned his coaching philosophy after his father's protege, Joe Gibbs, three-time Super Bowl winner, who, like a lot of coaches from that era, wore his Christian faith publicly. So, Beathard found a sign that said, in mid-August, he arrived at his office one morning and discovered a Black Lives Matter sign taped to the door. He immediately removed the sign. In small writing in the bottom corner, the sign listed a website for its sponsor, blacklivesmatter.org, an organization that Beathard justifiably views as Marxist and the cause of nationwide rioting, looting, and violence. The founders of BLM have admitted they've been trained in Marxist political theory. In trying to understand his players' affinity for BLM, Beathard has researched the organization. He's uncomfortable with BLM's call to disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure, a tenet of Christianity. Marxist political theory is hostile to all religions. I thought, no, I can't have this on my door, Beathard said, so I took it off and put it behind the chair in my office. I was praying about it, and I thought all lives matter here, and there's no other organization other than Jesus Christ to sponsor that. Later that day, Beathard hung his sign. Beathard has relied on his religion more than ever during the past year. During the summer, his wife Karen lost her battle with cancer. Beathard's 22-year-old nephew Clayton was stabbed and killed December 22nd outside a Nashville bar. I truly believe that all lives matter, Beathard said. It's right there in the Bible. God doesn't discriminate. He doesn't say, oh, I kind of like some of these people, but I really, really, really like these people. I keep hearing about the abortion rates and the gun killings. I think about the stuff that I got angry about when my nephew was tragically murdered. His life mattered. My wife's life mattered too. She lived with cancer for 5 years. She mattered to me. It's about every life. Beathard said the All Lives Matter signs hung on his door for nearly 2 weeks before he was politely asked by one of his superiors to remove it. They didn't demand it. They just asked as a favor, could you please take that off your door? Unbeknownst to him, a few days earlier, Beathard said someone had taken a picture of the sign and circulated among members of the Redbirds team. Some players were offended. Beathard had no idea the escalating tension after George Floyd would engulf him. On September 2nd, it did. That's when the school informed him he no longer had a position on the Red Bird's staff. Yes, yet another dispatch from white supremacist America. Oh, yeah. Joe Biden won the first debate, of course, because Donald Trump was a disgrace, an absolute disgrace to America. That's what the media is telling us. But strangely, it looks as if the Democrats want to throw in the towel. They want to throw in the towel on the rest of the debates. Nancy Pelosi, Biden shouldn't debate Trump again. One and done. I myself, who begins a sentence like that? I myself, she'll be using the royal we soon enough, do not think that Joe Biden should dignify debate with the president who has no commitment to fact, evidence, data, demeans the office he holds. You saw that on the stage, authenticity on both sides. The president is authentically a bully. Joe Biden, authentically decent. It was a sad occasion for our country. Yeah. Oh, and George Will, quite possibly the most pompous man in America, weighs in the Washington Post. The putrescence of America's public life was pitilessly displayed. Wow, suicidal search for alliteration there, George. Displayed Tuesday when for 98 minutes, whatever remains of the nation's domestic confidence and international stature shriveled like a brittle autumn leaf. The national interest, actually, national security, demands that the other two scheduled mortifications, fraudulently advertised as presidential debates, should be canceled. When a nation makes itself pathetic, the response of enemy nations is not sympathy, and an additional 180 or so minutes of ignorant assertions, mitigated only by the inarticulateness of the purveyors of them, will swell the electorate's already abundant crop of cynics, well defined as people prematurely disappointed about the future. Oh, wait. And of course, it wouldn't be a George Will column without Bartlett's. Got to dig out that Bartlett's there for some excellent quotations. Most Donald Trump utterances resemble turbid creeks that are silty at their sources and trickle away into mud. He might finish his presidential term without ever speaking a complete sentence, subject, object, predicate. Oliver Wendell Holmes, who characterized Theodore Roosevelt's Bull movement as one of strenuous vagueness, survived Antietam, but might have expired straining to decipher Tuesday's cascade of falsehoods, rudeness, and syntactical tangles. Some viewers, their minds already closed concerning their presidential choice, watched the debate the way some people watch stock car races in hopeful expectation of carnage. They were not disappointed. Others watched to decide whether Democratic nominee Joe Biden has the acuity and grit to remain composed while standing next to someone whose indifference to facts dictates his preferred mode of expression, a tantrum. Among the relatively few voters still undecided about their choice, many probably watched hoping for reassurance about Biden, somewhat as voters did about Ronald Reagan in 1980. Almost everything that Joe Biden said during the debate was a lie. And this is easily proved. First, he says that the Green New Deal will pay for itself. Then he says, I don't support the Green New Deal. That's, one of many. Oh, my son Hunter Biden didn't accept $3.2 million from Moscow. Well, he did. I could go on. Oh, wait, another quote. Another excellent top-class quote. Rancor, wrote Jose Ortega y Gasset, is an outpouring of a feeling of inferiority. A plurality of Americans have concluded that Trump has much to feel inferior about, and Tuesday probably changed neither this nor the nation's feeling of dread about its accelerating decay. Yes, a conservative speaks. Leftists call to cancel debates. So Melissa Harris Perry, and I continually have to remind myself who she is: parent, wife, professor, writer, consultant, speaker, backyard farmer, and of course there's a picture of her and some unidentified black man, and she's eating. She has a plastic spoon in her mouth, and her face is in ecstasy. But she made a very curious statement. Yes, cancel them. The debates are now a danger to public life and a direct threat to Black life. Cancel the debates. Here we see Black fragility at its finest. How exactly are these debates a direct threat to Black life? I asked her that question on Twitter. I didn't get a response. Walter Schaub says, cancel the other debates. This is stupid. Trump is only there to grunt, scratch, and howl. Is this some of this civility that we've heard so much about? Larry Sabato, who I've known for decades and decades, who's clearly gone over the edge, cancel the remaining presidential debates. This is all caps. It is impossible to have an orderly, productive exchange with Donald Trump. Stop pretending otherwise. The Atlantic's, I'm not interested in what the Atlantic has to say. Oh, and Mika Brzezinski on Morning Joe, we are better than this. If there cannot be a debate based on dignity, there should be no debate. Debates be damned, she said. Jill Winebanks, and I just can't, every time I see that name, my brain changes it to Jill Wineant. Nicole D. Wallace just correctly said Trump abused the process and that future moderators need to have a plan to stop it. Well, apparently we're hearing about this plan, which is Trump's microphone could be turned off, or he might get a time penalty in the next debate if he keeps interrupting under debate commission plans after dumpster fire clash. Who started the interruptions in the debate? That would be Joe Biden. And there were several of them. I don't know, he started it. But the Commission on Presidential Debates has vowed to change the format of the next candidate clash. RNC, Trump campaign pushed back on changing debate rules. This is from The Hill. The Republican National Committee and Trump campaign are signaling they will oppose changes to the presidential debate structure after the nonpartisan commission that manages the event is exploring potential adjustments following the chaotic contest in Cleveland. Appearing on Fox News, Republican RNC committee chairwoman Ronna Romney McDaniel said that the commission should not make any adjustments without the support of both campaigns and that the rules should not be changed in the middle of the campaign after both sides agreed to specific parameters. McDaniel also suggested that the Commission on Presidential Debates was pursuing changes in order to assist Democratic nominee Joe Biden, arguing that the former vice president got away without answering tough questions at the first debate. Very interesting piece on this at The Critic, co-UK, from Chris Buskirk, which is titled, Trump is Waging Asymmetric Warfare and It's Working. Teacher help, the president is being mean to me. That's the rough translation of Joe Biden's frequent desperate appeals to moderator Chris Wallace during last night's debate with Donald Trump. The former Veep came in for some rough treatment by the current leader of the free world. From the starting shot, President Trump was on the front foot, peppering Biden with a flurry of verbal blows, taunts, accusations, barbed criticisms, declarations of sublime political skill, triumph against long odds, and exemplary selflessness for himself. Biden didn't know what hit him, but he should have. And so should have his advisors and debate coaches. This is Trump's style. Trump is a street fighter waging asymmetric warfare against a traditional foe who is reviewing the rules of engagement and consulting the lawyers back at headquarters before doing anything. And all the while, he's getting pummeled. Idealists will say that it wasn't very presidential, that they didn't dig into policy and educate the American people. Where was the dignity? Welcome to electoral politics. It's always been thus. Founding father John Adams delighted in calling fellow founder Alexander Hamilton the bastard brat of a Scotch peddler. Adams himself came in for similar treatment during the election of 1800 when he was called a hermaphrodite, reportedly at the behest of Thomas Jefferson. And as I pointed out earlier this week, John Adams put about the story that Alexander Hamilton was a black man. And he didn't mean that in a good way. One of the most interesting and telling exchanges came about an hour into the debate. In some ways, each man showed himself in his purest form. Joe Biden delivered what was very obviously a well-rehearsed set-piece attack on President Trump. You could see the wind-up like a boxer pulling his arm way back, fist clenched, prepared to deliver the knockout blow. Biden started by repeating the accusation that Trump disrespectfully criticizes the military, calling them losers and suckers. The story has been debunked repeatedly by multiple sources, including those hostile to the president, like John Bolton. But it's part of the Biden campaign strategy. So he levels the accusations and then begins to eulogize his son, Beau Biden, who served in Iraq and later died of brain cancer. This makes it all personal to Joe, you see. He's defending his dead son against a mythical slander from the bad orange man. Biden even points a finger at Trump. My son is not a loser. Trauma mining to score points in a debate is a desperately cynical piece of political theater. But I suppose they calculate that if it works, you get to be president. I'll pass. Thanks. It was pure Biden. Scripted saccharine playing by the rules of a game that has long since ended. In case you think I'm too cynical, that surely this couldn't have been orchestrated, Joe Biden's official Twitter account posted a photo of Joe and Beau with the caption, "Beau was not a loser," just as the debate ended. And just so Trump. He looked at his podium and quietly, respectfully asked which son Biden was talking about. Of course he knew, but he played the game, forcing Biden to respond, "Beau. Oh, I don't know him. I know Hunter." He then listed the accusations against Hunter, that he took a $1.5 billion investment from China into the fledgling investment company he ran with John Kerry's son while his father was vice president and en route to China. He received $3.5 million from the mayor of Moscow. He had a sinecure from a Ukrainian energy company while his father was Obama's point man on Ukraine policy. NB. Hunter had no experience in business, let alone the energy business. It was as sweet a move as I've ever seen. The knockout punch was coming with all the force Joe Biden could muster, and Trump simply sidestepped it and counterpunch. It's no secret that the ruling class in America despises the country class. If you're one of those people who don't live in coastal cities and subscribe to the same worldview as the elite aspirants hoping for a job at a billionaire-backed NGO or an internship that might lead to a job at McKinsey, then you're a deplorable, a chud, and definitely racist, and whatever bad things are happening to your family and your inland town are your just desserts. One of Trump's main functions and biggest appeals is that he exposes the occupational elites that are credentialed but not expert in much of anything. Everyone knows it. Imposter syndrome is rampant. And Trump preys on their insecurities, which is what provokes such outrageous reactions from his enemies. But a lot of Americans who live in interior America and get unglamorous jobs at slowly declining wages, raise their families, want nothing more than to be left alone by the credentialed but unaccomplished strivers who hate them. For those people, Trump is their champion. They probably don't aspire to be like Trump, but they like the fact that he exposes the bankruptcy of the undeserving ruling class. And for them, Trump's debate tonight was a tour de force. It was aggressive. It was funny. He said the quiet part out loud. He broke the rules in public that are normally only broken in private. That won him the election in 2016. It won him the debate last night, and it might just get him reelected in November. So, Joe Biden doesn't seem to like Kyle Rittenhouse. And now attorneys for Kenosha gunman Kyle Rittenhouse have announced they plan to sue Joe Biden and his campaign for libel after the presidential candidate tweeted a video suggesting the teenager is a white supremacist. Lynn Wood, who is representing the 17-year-old shooter on Wednesday, said he is taking steps to demand a formal public retraction from the Biden-Harris campaign shortly after the former Veep shared the clip. The 50-second video showed a mashup of scenes from white supremacist rallies and far-right groups across the country as debate moderator Chris Wallace is heard asking Trump if he is willing to condemn the racist organizations. Yes, Joe Biden and his campaign have stepped in it. No question about this. Lynn Wood goes for blood. And I don't know, maybe they can keep this up. Maybe they can keep it up until the election. Lynn Wood represented Richard Jewell, of course, who was falsely accused of the Atlanta bombing. And of course, he represented Nick Sandmann against various media organizations. And he got a settlement from the Washington Post and a settlement against a CNN. I think that Joe Biden has picked on the wrong lawyer. It occurred to me today that Joe Biden, of course, a champion of America's military, and Donald Trump supposedly hates the military. No one who is not insane could possibly believe that. I was thinking, if Joe Biden loves the American military so much, why didn't he serve in it? Let's see. In August 1966, while enrolled as a student at Syracuse University College of Law, Biden married Anelia Hunter. They overcame her parents' reluctance for her to wed a Roman Catholic. They had 3 children, Beau Biden, Robert, Hunter Biden, and Naomi Christina. He told her he aimed to become a senator by the age of 30 and then president. Pretty close to a sociopath. During his first year at Syracuse, Biden was accused of plagiarizing 5 of 15 pages of a law review article. He said it was inadvertent and that he did not know the proper rules of citation. As a result, he failed the course and had to retake it. The plagiarism incident resurfaced in 1987 during his first run for president. Biden received a student draft deferments during this period. After completing his studies, the Selective Service System classified him as unavailable for service due to a history of asthma. Now, of course, Trump is mocked, ridiculed for his own deferments for medical reasons, but somehow Joe Biden is given a pass. Of course, I can't say that I am surprised. Let's see what J5 Killer has to say. Amid Disney layoffs, Central Florida counties turn to assistance programs. He says Disney layoffs are an attempt to win Florida for Biden, but they won't work. Florida is solid Trump. James Fallows had tweeted in 2016, was hearing from people, I don't know, I've seen the polls, but have you noticed all the Trump signs in past 24 hours on sports talk radio, from Aviation World Friends, from Finance Person, from Building Trades Guy, variants on what was that debate shit show by Trump. J5 Killer responds, Fallows is one of the most ridiculously out-of-touch people in America. My long guy Pedro and Mike and the Mad Dog are talking about the debates. Herder. I once had a very long conversation with James Fallows back in the 80s when he was signed in Kuala Lumpur. We talked about the Japanese novelist Shusaku Endo. It was a very enjoyable conversation, I must say. This is an official no black pill zone, says J5 Killer. Go be a sad sack somewhere else. We're having fun here. Nothing but white pills and champagne for us. If you're stressed out, take a break from social media. No shame in stepping back from this cesspool. But whatever you do, don't listen to what the left has to say about Trump's chances. They are flat out lying. Finally, if you can, learn to love the fight. Be a happy warrior. We will lose some battles guaranteed, but as long as we're still fighting, we can win. Keep your chin up and fight, which is excellent advice, I must say. Let's go back to the chat here. Metal Mike says Wallace debated Trump instead of asking him questions. Halper, even if the sun makes millions, influence peddling overseas. AlphaGo, hello Kevin, I hope you are well. Well, this is it. Looking a little pink for some reason. That is not actually my skin color. I suspect it's because it's overcast here in the lower mainland. Brandon Smith says that's called treason when people who aren't connected do it. AlphaGo says, God, I hate plagiarism. Another famous plagiarist, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who was established to have plagiarized, somewhere between 30 to 50% of his PhD thesis for his Doctor of Divinity at Boston University. And then, of course, later he plagiarized a whole bunch of his speeches. Yes, same could be asked of Trump. No, actually, it could be asked of Trump why he didn't serve in the military. But I'm just saying that no one seems to mention that Joe Biden was in the sweet spot for being called up for military service, and he managed to get out of it. Metal Mike says Trump needs better debate prep. He could have thrown Kamala's busing crap back at Biden. Dennis Dale says, are you kidding? Metal Mike says he should have ridiculed Biden's Buy American talk by reminding people of Biden's support for NAFTA, WTO, China preferred trade status, etc. Dennis Dale says Trump needs to better enunciate the law and order argument. You know, in the stress of a live debate, it's often difficult, particularly when your opponent is yelling at you to shut up and calling you a clown and the like. You can always think of the things that you should have said. I think that Trump landed some haymakers. Platinum Plan and Dems are racist. I like the name, Platinum Plan. I like that a lot. I think that's kind of a master stroke, really. I think it's going to hit home with the intended audience, at least some of them. Chad Chadson, our valiant moderator. Thank you, Chad. Says YouTube might have deleted it, Mary. I don't see it. I see the algorithms are busy. Oh, yes, I should have mentioned this earlier. Donald Robertson says George Will, he has the right to opine on election debates after helping Reagan cheat during the fall 1980 election debates, which is absolutely true. In a few minutes, I'm going to be talking about Albert Brooks's 1981 movie, Modern Romance. But let's talk about Canada. Let's talk about Canadian smugness. And the smugness is just pretty much out of control this week. This is from CTV News. PM Trudeau, other leaders condemn white supremacy in wake of Trump's refusal to do so. Well, of course, Rachel Gilmore's story is based on a lie that Trump did not disavow white supremacism. The Prime Minister has condemned and will continue to condemn right-wing extremism, white supremacy, and racism in all its forms. Read a statement from Trudeau's office. In Canada, we're not immune to extremism that not only divides our communities, but threatens the safety of Canadians. Conservative leader Erin O'Toole, cuck supreme, echoed the clear condemnation of white supremacy. I categorically condemn white supremacy and all forms of hate. Take that, hate. In the military, I served all Canadians. Now as leader, I continue to serve all Canadians. Hatred, including white supremacy, has no place in Canada. Is he referring to political hatred? What about personal hatred? Because there's an awful lot of that about. During the debate, Trump was asked whether he condemns white supremacist groups and the violence they participated in during summer protests. Good one, Rachel. He refused to do so. You are a liar. You are fake news. Let's see. I have no interest in what Jagmeet Singh has to say about anything. Oh, Terry Glavin, he was running this organization a few years ago. It was called something like the Canadian Afghan Friendship Association, because of all of the myriad of really close connections between Canada and Afghanistan. I suppose most Americans don't know this. But Canadian soldiers were fighting in Afghanistan for about a decade. Interestingly, Stephen Harper enunciated the doctrine that he, as Prime Minister of Canada, has the sole right to decide if Canada is at war, where Canada is at war, with who. Parliament was not given a chance to vote on whether Canada should be at war in Afghanistan, and the cost of this was kept secret. Terry Glavin, I think he glows in the dark. The end of America and democracy as we know it. The free world's worst nightmare is not a victory for Trump's Republicans, which would be catastrophic enough. It's the prospect of Trump losing, but refusing to relinquish power. It is no longer far-fetched to imagine this happening. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. What this means, it is genuinely conceivable that the American Republic will succumb to a violent constitutional collapse or some kind of mutiny during the 79-day twilight zone between the closing of the polls on November 3rd and Inauguration Day, January 20th. As for what fresh hell would unfold on that day and what nightmarish crises might cascade afterwards, it's anybody's guess. You might think this is lathering on a bit thick. It isn't. There's certainly enough hysteria about Trump's making the rounds, and there are very real distortions that occur in mainstream American journalism arising from a debilitating hostility between the Trump administration and what Trump insists on calling the fake news media. Yeah, Trump made it clear during the debate that he's not going to let the Democrats steal the election. And he issued a threat, a veiled threat. As far as I can see it, he told Joe Biden that the Democrats can knock it off. And if they don't knock it off, then everyone in the Obama administration, including Biden, right up to Obama himself, faces indictment for illegally surveilling his campaign for the illegal investigation called Russiagate, for what other people might call sedition, actually. So you see, but Terry Glavin is very, very upset because Trump does not have much of a liking for killing foreigners, just for the hell of it. That Terry Glavin loves forever wars, and Trump does not. So obviously Trump is a bad man. Perhaps the most hilarious of these such stories is from Susan Delacourt, who has been around in Ottawa as a reporter forever. Canada has sent election observers to fragile democracies. Donald Trump's America should be on that list. Canada to the rescue. Canada, the champion of democracy. And there's an idiotic picture, presumably on Canada Day, our generic national holiday, of a bunch of people wearing red toques, holding our generic national flag. That, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe set up a 40-plus member mission in the United States with 11 experts based in Washington and 30 observers dispatched throughout the country. Canada is a member of the OSCE, so technically you could just say that it has some kind of election observation presence for what is shaping up to be a wild democratic ride in the United States. But Trump's escalating rhetoric around the very legitimacy of the vote would appear to call for more direct, formal observation, not just formal observation, but more direct formal observation. I bet they're sweating in Washington over this. Much like this country dispatched during the 2019 vote in Ukraine, why don't you talk, Susan Delacourt, about Canada's involvement and the overthrow, the coup in the Ukraine, and the illegal government that was installed there, a very curious coalition, as I pointed out earlier, of Jewish oligarchs and neo-Nazis. We could also discuss how party leaders are chosen in Canada. It always comes down to the Sikh vote for some reason. And a great many of these people voting for party leaders, they belong to other parties, which means they should be disqualified. They don't live in Canada, which means they should be disqualified, or they're dead. But I don't know. Let's not get into that. Before we, Megan Mertz is in the news again. She praises Black Lives Matter protests as a beautiful thing, but admits they have been inflammatory. And Harry discusses his racial awakening as Pear blasts UK's structural racism. I don't think that Harry knows what the word structural means, let alone structural racism. But so here you have these people ensconced in a mansion, a $15 million mansion in Los Angeles. And so Harry is making demands of the United States, and now he's making demands of Britain as well. Prince Harry is the greatest friend that British Republicans have ever had, because it's quite possible, he could finish off the monarchy in his lifetime. I wanted to talk about Chrissy Teigen briefly. This is a very distressing story. I mentioned her earlier in the week. This is from the Daily Mail. Chrissy Teigen bravely shared her heartbreaking news that she and her husband, John Legend, had lost their baby Jack halfway through the pregnancy. And her decision to post pictures on social media caused a debate on Loose Women on Thursday, with Carol McGiffin, 60, said she felt uncomfortable seeing the images, and Jane Moore, 58, questioning the timing. While the ladies were incredibly sympathetic to the sad news, their words led to impassioned tweets from viewers who said, "It's not for you to comment on how a woman grieves a pregnancy loss." Last week, I was talking about Christopher Lash's book about narcissism. One of the points that he made is the culture of narcissism, it erases personality. When everything that people do is public, when there is no privacy, one can hardly say that a personality actually exists. Chrissy Teigen is obviously, she suffered a very sad event, but she has turned herself into an amplifier. She can barely be said to be human at all. And since this is a very contentious woman, a fractious woman who is been accused of mean tweets or Instagram posts herself, and is so desperately thirsty, a day in which she is not in the news is a wasted day for her. I suppose a cynic might conclude that she has exploited her troubled pregnancy for all that it is worth. It is not my business. It is no one else's business except for her and her family. She is leveraging this death for clicks, for tweets, for more attention, attempt to slake her thirst. It's absolutely appalling. And we see a similar thing with Joe Biden. Oh, why don't you tell us about Beau Biden again, Joe? Why don't you talk about your son? I'm sure Beau Biden was a fine fellow, but the fact is that he's, one, dead, and two, not running for president. You are. And of course, he doesn't seem to have figured out, Trump has figured this out, but Joe Biden's too stupid to figure it out. If you're going to mention one of your sons, then this is going to draw attention to the other son. That is to say, Hunter Biden, the incestuous crackhead grifter with a fondness for strippers, dildos, and hydrotherapy. So, quick look at the chat here before I move on to the book club. Alrighty. She is still half nude in the pics. The pics are artistically altered. Her husband is posing in a grieving pose. Not okay, says YT. Let's hear the Werner Herzog Nosferatu review. Well, that will be closer to Halloween, as is appropriate. Metal Mike says there's actually a memorial in Canada paying tribute to one of Himmler's Ukrainian residents. Yeah, I don't know whether I get into that. The partisans of Stepan Bandera are very ferocious people. Actually, yes, those were real neo-Nazis in the Ukraine that U.S. hawks supported. Yes, they provided the muscle. Yeah. Okay, so today's movie is from 1981. It is called Modern Romance. It stars Albert Brooks. It is directed by Albert Brooks. And it is co-written by Albert Brooks and his longtime writing partner, Monica Johnson. Albert Brooks is a comedian who is the son of a comedian. And I guess one of the problems with being a comedian is that people think that if you're an on-comedian, people think that you're funny all the time. Albert Brooks's name is actually Albert Einstein. Yes, it is. His father was called Harry Einstein, and he had worked with Eddie Cantor, and he was called Parkyarchus. Get it? Anyway, he died on stage. And people thought it was an act. I guess Albert Brooks he regards this rather drolly, because there is a reference to this in his movie Defending Your Life, where they're in the afterworld in a nightclub, he and Meryl Streep, And there's just a dreadful comedian on stage who's attempting chit chat with the audience. And the comedian asks Albert Brooks, "How did you die?" And he says, "On stage, like you." Albert Brooks is, I suppose, people would call him the comedian's comedian. That's how he is regarded by other people in the business. He became known for his many appearances on Johnny Carson. And I suppose he was seen as revelatory to younger comedians because his act was very different from traditional, from what we used to get from them. He worked on Saturday Night Live at the very beginning when the format was, I don't know, it was far more open than it is now. And of course, he is an actor, and people will remember him as the political operative in Taxi Driver, who is, of course, well, he's very attracted. He's very attracted to his co-worker, Sybil Shepherd, and who wouldn't be? She mocks him for lack of manhood or whatever, and he determines that he's going to keep that Robert De Niro out of the office. So Brooks has directed a number of films. 1979 was his first. It's called Real Life, and it is really rather prescient in establishing a reality world. Yeah, a world in which it's just a reality show. One of his, as an actor, I thought he was quite memorable in the movie Broadcast News, where again he played kind of a schlemiel, you know, who is romantically obsessed with his co-worker Holly Hunter, who's frankly not worth it. And after he made Lost in America in 1985, which is a very, very funny movie. Again, it's kind of a parody of Easy Rider, only instead of motorcycles, there is a motor home. And I mentioned Defending Your Life, which came out in 1991, which is a very funny movie. It's a very sweet movie as well. It's rather strange to me because you hear people say you don't regret things that you did in life. You regret the things that you didn't do. And I'm thinking that's certainly not true for me. But the point of Defending Your Life is that fear, an unwillingness to seek what you want, is the greatest sin. I didn't care all that much for his movie Mother, which had stunt casting in it, Debbie Reynolds. I thought that the Muse, which came out in 1999, was underrated. And I guess Looking for Comedy in the Muslim World, which came out in 2005, that was pretty much close to the end of his career. It was spectacularly misjudged, that movie. But we are talking about a happier movie here, Modern Romance. And here's the tagline. Robert was madly in love with Mary. Mary was madly in love with him. Under the circumstances, they did the only thing they could do. They broke up. If it's not love, what is it? I was thinking the other day after rewatching this film that Albert Brooks could be called the father of cringe comedy, because I saw this movie about the time that it came out, of course, when I was a much, much younger man. And watching it earlier this week, it just was brought home to me just how painful so much of the movie is to watch, because Albert Brooks's character is so self-destructive. Now, let's look at his life. He's a, I don't know what, 30-ish, let's say, film editor in Hollywood. And he drives a Porsche. And has a nice home. And his girlfriend, who is played by the lovely Catherine Harold, is the most beautiful woman in the world. Seriously, she is. And Albert Brooks's character, Robert Cole, seems to have a problem with this. That we have this wide two shot, which opens the film, and it's a restaurant, not a very expensive restaurant, where he has arranged to meet. He's in the midst of editing a terrible science fiction film, a sort of Star Wars ripoff. Anyway, he meets Catherine Harold, who's called Mary Harvard, for dinner. And he's in a hurry because he's got to get back to the editing studio, but this is important. He has something to say. They have to talk, which of course is the reverse of how these things normally work, because it's the woman typically who says, we have to talk, and the man, this is not going to be good. This is not going to be good. But so Albert Brooks announces that he is breaking up with her. And so we don't really know we know nothing about Mary Harvard, Catherine Harold's character, at the beginning, except, as I said, she's the most beautiful woman in the world. And so what could his problem be with her? Is she stupid? Is she, so far below him intellectually that this would cause unease? No, she is some sort of bank executive, so she's not stupid. Is she crazy? Well, we don't see any examples of her acting crazy in the movie, and she's obviously less crazy than Albert Brooks's character is. So what's his problem? What's his problem? Perhaps he thinks that he doesn't deserve a woman like this, that he thinks that he's been, too lucky in life, that he needs to be punished in some way. And if, the punishment is not going to come externally, it's going to come internally. And I don't know, is this Jewish neuroticism? It could be. I suppose you could see some resemblance between Brooks's character, or the kind of character he tends to play in his films, and Woody Allen. But of course, Albert Brooks is a much better looking man than Woody Allen. So I don't know. This is just a man who was determined to screw everything up. And so this breakup does not go well, because he hasn't thought this through. He's breaking up with this woman, and apparently this is not the first time this has happened, and she's had it. She is very angry. Very, very angry indeed. And don't call me, she says. Yeah. No. And some hilarious dialogue in this film. I don't think we should go out anymore. I mean, I just think it's over. Okay, it's over again. No, not again. This is it. This is the last time. It's for real. And you don't love me? I do love you. I mean, love has nothing to do with this. Yes, I love you. I mean, that makes it very confusing, but I just don't think, you've heard of a no-win situation, haven't you? No. No? Really no? You've never heard of one? Vietnam? This? I'm telling you, they're around. I think we're in one of them. Now, that is quite a leap of imagination there to compare Albert Brooks's, what he believes to be his failing relationship to his girlfriend, to the Vietnam War. But so he does. And he returns to work, where we see this space opera that he's working on with his assistant editor, Bruno Kirby, who is very amusing, droll, in a small role. And so Albert Brooks is clearly in a state, and he's really not fit for work. And no, he wants to work. And Bruno Kirby tells him, no. Why don't you just go home? Okay, you've been through something big here. You don't need to be alone. get some sleep, and then come back, the next day, whatever, and work. So he gives him 2 Quaaludes. And Quaaludes were a very big thing in the 1970s and 1980s. They were a kind of drug of choice. The Wolf of Wall Street, of course, its famous Quaalude scene. They were just enormously popular. It's kind of drug. You're supposed to take it to go to sleep, and it would work that way. But if you fight it off, it makes you high and it makes you sloppy. And I suppose that Quaaludes are associated more than anything culturally than with disco. Disco and Quaaludes, Quaaludes and disco. So Albert Brooks decides that he's going to take 2 of these Quaaludes, and he doesn't think that they have any kind of effect. And then you see that they do have an effect, and Albert Brooks playing stoned, Quaalude stoned, is very funny indeed. Because he's trying, he's walking around his house. Oh, and look at all my records. I love my records. And his list of his phone numbers. Oh, look at all my friends. I love my friends. And his bird, Petey. What is it? A cockatiel. He loves his bird, Petey. He loves life, and he calls Bruno Kirby, and he starts spewing messily over the phone. And he says, I didn't tell you this before, and I think I should tell you now. I love you. I mean, in the right way. I think you're an amazing guy, and I think I just love you. And Bruno Kirby says, the ludes kicked in, right? And Albert Brooks' character takes great offense to this. You're saying that I couldn't say that, I loved you without the Quaaludes. Well, it's normally not the sort of thing one man says to another man. And of course, he's prepared this breakup, and, he's not going to fall apart. And then we see him take a call from someone that he knows who's a assistant editor looking for work. And Albert Brooks says, I think you're the best assistant editor in the business. Of course, he'd already told Bruno Kirby this. And so, oh, how's Mary? Oh, we've broken up. Oh, you've broken up. So do you think, would there be anything wrong? Would you have a problem with me calling her? And Albert Brooks completely flips out at this. What does he call him? Scum, human garbage, etc., etc. And he makes a date with this woman called Ellen. And he's just in full flight over the phone that this is going to be the greatest date of all time. It's going to be the most romantic date. I'm going to pick you up, and I'm going to take you somewhere. You're not going to know where it is. I don't know where it is, but it's going to be great. And she had said that she was surprised to hear from him. No, why would you be surprised, Ellen? And later on, we see this date, and this Albert Brooks's character does not come out of this looking good. He shows up, she gets in the car, drive away, and about 5 minutes later, he's dumping her at her front door, saying, "Yeah, I'm sorry, it's too early. This isn't going to work," or whatever. And this woman, she seems like a nice woman, she's completely nonplussed by this, because it seemed that he was carrying this torch for her all of these years. I mean, what else would explain this extraordinary performance that he puts on? And then, nah, you're not it. I'm dumping you. There's not going to be a date. But so at the end of this night, he puts on a fifth of Beethoven. The disco Beethoven song with Walter Murphy, was that his name? And nope, it's too depressing. Beethoven went deaf. He tried to write music when he was deaf. And then he decides he's going to go somewhere in his Porsche, in the dark. And I suppose this is one of those things that you see in movie where, the SJWs are going, this is so problematic. I mean, he's stoned on drugs and he's not fit to drive an automobile. Yeah, that's the joke. Okay. He gets in the car and he turns on the radio and he passes out and then wakes up the next morning in the sun, where he decides he's going to change his life. And so it was very common, again, in the 70s and 80s, jogging. Jogging was very, very hip, despite the fact that everyone seemed to be doing it. And you just see, it's a very funny scene at the sporting goods store. You just see how much of jogging or exercise generally is conspicuous consumption. Because his brother is the salesman, you would know as a Super Dave Osborne, his brother Bob Einstein. And it's a delightful scene. Brooks described it later as being like Jack Benny. Jack Benny being one of his heroes, because Jack Benny didn't really do things that were funny, out front funny. He was reacting to other people, to other unpleasant or outrageous people. And so his brother, Bob Einstein, said, I don't know what's funny in this scene. And Albert Brooks says, no, don't worry about it. Okay. He was asked whether the scene was improvised. And he said, no, it was not improvised. And we learned that Albert Brooks does not believe in improvisation in films. And that he said, and I thought this was quite good, that the problem with improvisation is that it almost always ends in anger. That one of the people improvising ends up shouting, you're an asshole, at someone else. That's where it always goes. But anyway, so Albert Brooks is new to all of this stuff, and he's looking at this sort of the bargain box where you can get all this stuff. I don't know, $70. And the salesman says, no, you don't want that. That's garbage. It's garbage? Like, why is it garbage? Well, are you serious about this or not? And of course, that is straight to the point. Yes, of course I'm serious. I'm not a tourist here. I'm making a life change, he says. So, yeah, well, you want these shoes. They're $50. Now I'll have to explain that back in 1981, $50 was an enormous amount of money for a pair of running shoes. But he's got them on the running shoes and the tracksuit. And you need two tracksuits. Why do I need two tracksuits? What if one of them is in the wash, right? And you're going to need weights, and you're going to need salt tablets, and you're going to need all this stuff. And so Albert Brooks is looking at spending hundreds of dollars, which again, would be worth over $1,000 today. And he has second thoughts. And his brother, the salesman, says, I'm not perfect. Perhaps I misjudged you. Take the box. In other words, you're not a serious person. And so, no. I'll buy whatever you want to sell me. I'll buy whatever you want to sell me. And then we see him at a track, and he's going into his starting stance, and he manages to knock over another runner, a serious runner. And it's clear that he is just obsessed with Mary. 1, 2, 3, he's chanting. And I don't even miss her. 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And I don't even miss her. 2, 3. And it doesn't take very long at all before Albert Brooks realizes that he made a terrible decision in breaking up with Mary. But then he calls her, and she is not best pleased to get this call, not at all. What, are you talking to someone? Do you have another boyfriend already? You may have seen this. Stanley Kubrick very much liked modern romance, and he asked Albert Brooks a whole bunch of questions about it. It was one of his favorite films, and he told Albert Brooks that he always wanted to make a film about jealousy, and that he thought this was a fine example of the genre. Of course, eventually Kubrick's final film was Eyes Wide Shut, which is about jealousy. But there's a particular kind of jealousy where, it's not necessary, really. I mentioned that Albert Brooks's character is an editor, and James L. Brooks, who was a famous director himself, and of course one of the creators of The Simpsons, plays an idiot. He just plays an idiot. There's some really nice, how would I say, mise en scène there, because Albert Brooks has an idea, the kind of an idea that editors get that greatly improve films. That George Kennedy playing himself is the leader, the military leader, and of course he's wearing long white robes because that's what everyone is going to do in the future, right? And so there's some secret has gotten out, some sort of code has been stolen, and is it you? Is it you? Is it you? You're not fit to serve in the fleet, bunch of weasels. And James L. Brooks is really attached to this bunch of weasels line. And Albert Brooks remembered that there was some footage, some coverage of this suspect. And he was doing something shifty with his eyes. And no, we'll take this from here and we'll put it in here. Then we can lose the whole George Kennedy yelling and his bunch of weasels. And him and Bruno Kirby show it to the director, played by James L. Brooks. No, I liked it better. What do you mean you liked it better? See, this is a shortcut. We can eliminate all this stuff because we've already established who the fellow is. That's the traitor. We don't need to go into all this exposition. It's just there in his eyes. And James L. Brooks says, no, I liked it the way that it was. The weasels. George Kennedy ranting about weasels. And James L. Brooks is convinced that there's a problem with sound effects on the film, that when they're running down the hall of this spaceship, somehow the sound isn't good enough, that they need better sound. He says, how much did you say this weighs, to the guy who's mixing the ADR session? I don't know. Maybe it doesn't weigh anything. Did you ever think of that? Maybe it's one of those planets that doesn't have any gravity. This is a funny scene because the people involved with the sound design in the studio, they don't care. They just do movie after movie after movie. And so you've got Albert Brooks carrying, bag of sand or whatever, and pounding and going, to match the running in the film. And so after it's done, he goes to the mixer and says, what do you think? And the mixer says, completely deadpan, I think you saved the movie. Because no, that's not going to save the movie. Albert Brooks buys a bunch of gifts for Mary, including a cute little toy stuffed giraffe. Not full size, of course, because that would be hideous. And a bunch of other things. And he wants some sort of doll that is going to say her name. And of course, there's no such doll. And he manages to completely alienate the sales clerk in the store, who thinks he's a lunatic. And then he's determined to get back into Mary's life. And it appears that Mary has been she was talking to someone in New York for some periods of time. I guess when they were together, it's never explained exactly who this person was. There could be all manner of innocent explanations for this, but he's come to the conclusion that she was cheating on him the whole time. And he manages to get back together with her and, tells her how much he loves her and all that. And they fall into bed immediately. And the trouble starts the very next day because she is wearing a tight sweater to work. You can see I put a screen cap up on Twitter. And she's got this great figure and she's not wearing a bra. And he says, you can't wear that into work. Why not? She says, your nipples, they look like eyeballs. And so he's convinced that she's doing something, carrying on with someone at work or whatever. And she has this business dinner with a bunch of Japanese clients, and he invades the dinner and makes a terrible scene. Oh, I don't know, maybe she's sleeping with the Japanese. And we see them at a party that James L. Brooke gives, and George Kennedy is there. And there's a bunch of, men. And of course, men would obviously be very attracted to Catherine Harold's character. And he drags her away from the party. He's going to have to rein this in, or it's just going to be impossible. Eventually, they end up in the mountains, California, Sierras, and they have a reconciliation there. But one doesn't get the impression that this is going to last, because his character is simply impossible. Simply impossible. Albert Brooks, in Defending Your Life, he was talking about the wife that he'd previously had. It was the same woman who did the character Mulva on Seinfeld. And he said that, I think that a woman should just be good looking enough to turn you on. And after rewatching Modern Romance, I thought maybe this is Albert Brooks's philosophy. Maybe, his character with Catherine Harold is that this isn't going to work because this woman is just too much for me. She's just too good looking, too sexy for me, which I think is very much a defeatist attitude. I wanted to say something about Catherine Harold. She's not really had much of a career, which is a mystery to me, because she's a beautiful woman who can act. And some of you might remember her as Larry Sanders' first wife on the Larry Sanders Show. But as I continue to point out, Hollywood has never particularly liked beautiful women. Beautiful women are not particularly aspirational. Beauty is a gift of God. It's not something you can purchase with makeup or a new hairdo. And so with this excess of secular democracy that we have in North America, beautiful people face prejudice, both women and men. Robert Redford took decades before he was taken seriously. Brad Pitt, decades before he was taken seriously. But Catherine Harold, just an absolutely gorgeous woman. And she's good in this. But of course, this is Albert Brooks's show. I mean, the movie is pretty much all on his shoulders. And it is, I suppose you could say that it's an example of toxic masculinity, but in the other direction, actually. This is a exceedingly funny film, one of the funniest films I've ever seen. But as I say, depending on one's own romantic experience, say, one may find it, too painful to watch, because Albert Brooks is just the epitome of the man who is determined to wreck his own life. And let's have a final look at the chat. Film, not U.S. comedy series. Okay. What we do in the shadows is funny, but Wakita Cohen has gone full on SJW these days, says Alpha Go. Well, one other thing about Modern Romance is 1981. So how long ago was that? It's almost 40 years. The change in California, I mean, you won't recognize this California. And I'm talking about demographics, but also not everyone being obsessed with politics all the time. It seems kind of paradisial, Mediahead says Werner Herzog and Klaus Kinski each could be their own episodes of discussion. When I found out that we're watching a documentary about Werner Herzog, that he knew Klaus Kinski from a very early age, and that he knew from before that he got into movies that Klaus Kinski was certifiably insane and violent, his determination to keep up with him and to utilize his acting talent, it's rather noble. Why did they stop making Quaaludes? Pressure from the U.S. government, as I recall. So tomorrow is the book club, and I'm going to be discussing Booker T. Washington's memoir, Up From Slavery. Next week on Theater Thursday, I'm going to be talking about Bill and Ted Face the Music, which came out this year, directed by Dean Parisot, who directed one of my favorite movies, Galaxy Quest. I saw this movie again this week. I liked it a little better than I did the first time, but it's a disappointment to me. And Ed Solomon, who's one of the writers, talked about how very rushed this was, rushed. And it's clear that the film was chopped up and rather clunkily put together. October 15th, I'm thinking of ending things, Charlie Kaufman's new movie. On October 22nd, as promised, Nosferatu by Herzog, his version homage to Friedrich Murnau's 1924 classic. And one of the most frightening movies ever made, certainly I think so, on October 29th, Robert Wise's The Haunting. And coming up on the book club in weeks to come, an American classic on October 9th, Archie and Mehitabel by Don Marquis. It's a cartoon series which ran for decades about a cockroach and a cat. On October 16th, Democracy, The God That Failed by Hans Hermann Hoppe. On October 23rd, a memoir of the Spanish Civil War from the nationalist side, Mine Were of Trouble by Peter Kemp. And for Halloween, October 30th, well, the day before, I picked something macabre, Evelyn Waugh's The Loved One. So I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. And if you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you click on the like button. Subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not already done so. Let's see, Brandon Smith says jogging is the gateway drug. Endorphins are a hell of a drug. I used to jog. I was on the long-distance running team in high school, my sole moment of jockdom. And then I jogged during high school and for several years afterwards. And one day, you're supposed to hit the endorphin rush to overwhelm the pain. And I thought, why am I seeking out pain? This doesn't make any sense. So I stopped doing it. And I'm glad that I did, because jogging is very, very bad for your body. It's bad for your ankles, bad for your knees, and particularly for your hips. If you would like to patronize this live stream with a donation, very, very much appreciated right now. My PayPal account is at kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you're Canadian, you can send money directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And I will leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly hope that you, my dear listeners and viewers, manage to form a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.